you hear me? We're good? Okay. It's not as booming as it normally is. Welcome to the February meeting of the Historic Landmark Commission. I'm John Iwanowski, the chair. Calling this meeting to order. And just running through the attendance quick, we have Vice Chair Carlton Getz, as well as Commissioners DeLay, Vela, White, Stewart, and Barnett. Michael Abramson and Emily Kearns were excused for this meeting with a prior absence. So we have a quorum, and just to review the public hearing procedure here, we'll have 3 public hearings tonight on the agenda. They will all start with a presentation by the planning staff, and then we'll give the applicant 10 minutes to go over their own presentation. Following that, we will have a public hearing, at which case members of the public wishing to speak will have 2 minutes to speak on an item. You can either fill out one of these comment cards, which is the easiest way to do it, or we'll also just let people step up to the microphone in the back and speak for 2 minutes. Following the public hearing, we'll go into executive session, at which point only the commission is allowed to speak, and we will discuss and then vote on each item. Moving on to approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Do we have any motions on the January?
To approve the minutes from the January meeting.
Great. We have a motion from Mike.
Carlton, were you there in January?
Second.
And a second from Babs.
It says that Carlton was there and he wasn't there. That's just a correction.
Oh, got it. So we do have one correction. If you'd like to add that to your motion. Carlton was written into the minutes as being here, but he was not.
Excuse me. I make a motion that the minutes be approved, other than Carlton, who has been noted as being in attendance and actually was not.
And I'll second that.
Great. Motion by Mike, Babs seconded. Let's just run through the tally here. Babs?
Aye.
I am an aye myself. Mike?
Aye.
Adrian?
Aye.
Carlton?
I will abstain.
Jared?
Aye.
And Alan?
Aye.
Okay, the minutes are approved unanimously with 1 abstention. Moving on to the report of the chair and vice chair, I just have a quick event announcement, if I can pull it up real quick. Tomorrow night, there is a lecture up at the U at the Architecture Building called Master Plan, Soft Power and the Politics of Architectural Experience. It's being presented by Joss Kiley of the University of Cincinnati, as well as our own Michael Abramson, who's an assistant professor at the U. That's at 4 o'clock tomorrow in room 127 at the Architecture Building. They're just going over their upcoming book, which is about kind of mid-century master plans throughout the country. Maybe they'll talk about the 2nd century plan, if we're lucky. Do you have anything to add, Carlton? Report of the director.
Just a couple things to go over tonight. So Tuesday, there was a city council briefing, and they received a briefing on the mixed use consolidation proposal, which is the consolidation of 27 transit station area, commercial, form-based, and mixed-use zoning districts into 6 new and 1 existing zoning district. We anticipate some follow-up briefings after that one, but with a slated timeline of March, maybe early April. There was also a briefing on an alley vacation just off of 3rd West in Paxton. And that's all I have to go over. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Kelsey. Moving on to general public comments. We did receive one comment card from Cindy Cromer. So Cindy, you have 2 minutes to speak.
So I want to recall the work of Lauren Parisi and Tracy Tran on the RMF 30 modifications, and also shout out to the staff who've put this proposal together for the RMF 35 and 45 changes, even though I disagree with the content, but it's an incredible piece of work. And I hope they don't leave like Tracy and Lauren did after the project. Generally, I avoid making a general comment when I'm also speaking at hearings, but tonight is a royal flush or whatever you want to call it. I have to talk about the RMF 35 to 45 changes as proposed because I believe they're going to have a huge impact on the Central City, Avenues, and Capitol Hill historic districts. As the owner of 4 buildings in the city's historic districts, I anticipate many of those impacts to be negative. The damages that I anticipate center around the fact that all 4 of my buildings are contributory, all are non-conforming regarding density, and they are also non-complying regarding setbacks. A big part of the value of my buildings is their non-conforming density. For decades, I have not been able to rebuild if my buildings were restored by fire or earthquake. I assure you I take very good care of them as a result. Because of the depreciation on my buildings, and it will be exhausted in 4 to 5 years, the best option for me in terms of taxes is to demolish them and rebuild. I can't, and their presence in the historic district constrains what I can do on the site. This proposal ties directly to my recent remarks emphasizing the importance of contributory versus non-contributory status. Under this proposal, I would be better off with non-contributory buildings. I could demolish that structure and restart the depreciation. All of my 4 buildings have the form of a single-family residence, although they currently contain multiple units. But the setbacks proposed for the new construction are based on the adjacent zone, not on the form of the adjacent structure. So I have buildings which appear to be single-family dwellings located in multiple family zones. The city is not going to wall them in with 45 and 55-foot tall structures that I can't possibly build myself because of the contributory status of my buildings and the regulations associated with the district. At least they're not going to do that without a fight. So I urge you to look very carefully at this proposal because the worst of the unintended consequences will be in the Capitol Hill, Avenues, and Central City historic districts. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. If there are no other general public comments, we'll move on to our first public hearing of the evening, which is Cottonwood Western Gardens, new construction modification at approximately 550 South, 600 East. That's case number PLN HLC 2023-00909. And we have Nan Larson to present.
Thank you, Chair. Planning staff has received a modification request to the new construction approval for the Cottonwood Western Gardens project for a change to the exterior building material on the project. The Historic Landmark Commission heard this item last fall and approved the new construction application at that time. The original approval was for the exterior building material, included hard-coated stucco and a full brick veneer. The applicant has requested that the exterior building material is the same hard-coated stucco, but with a thin brick veneer. Staff is recommending that the Historic Landmark Commission approve this modification request. I just wanted to give a quick recap. The site is located at 550 South, 600 East in the Central City Local Historic District. It's within the FBUN2 zoning district and is located to the immediate west of Trolley Square. The site was approved to house a multifamily residential structure and an accompanying leasing office towards the south of the site. The proposed multifamily structure will house approximately 166 residential units in the 4-story building. The leasing office will be 2 stories or 29 feet tall. And that full brick veneer is pretty apparent from 600 East. During staff's review of the exterior building material modification, It was found that the modification will not impact the project's compliance with the new construction standards and the applicable design guidelines, including the recess at the individual windows that are apparent from the street. The modification will also not impact compliance with the FBUN2 zoning standards. Therefore, staff is recommending that the Historic Landmark Commission approve the new construction modification request with the conditions that are listed in the staff report. And those conditions in the staff report are the same that were there with the new construction approval.
Okay, thanks, Nan. Do we have any questions for staff at this time?
Yeah, I do just have one question. So, from the way I understood, reading the staff report, the only difference, at least appearance-wise, that this change makes is that the reveal on the windows is not as deep,
Correct.
but it still meets the criteria of the design guidelines. Is that correct?
Yes, the criteria is a 3-inch recess.
It still meets the 3-inch recess.
It still meets the 3-inch.
Okay.
It was the original, I believe it was 4 inches, was the original approval. So with the thin brick, it would be 3 inches.
Okay, that's what I had thought, but I wanted to confirm.
Yeah, that's great.
Any other questions for staff at this time? Okay, great. We'll welcome up the applicant. We have Alex Stoddard listed as the presenter.
Good evening. So yeah, this is a pretty minor modification. Like Nan mentioned, everybody saw this a few months ago. So what I've included here is basically just a couple of the original renderings, which were submitted last time, just to show there's actually no material difference in the way the building looks from the street. The brick size, the color is the same. So I included kind of just an image here of the thin brick. They basically make a full brick and cut the front of it off. And just as we've been going through the development process on this building and meeting with contractors, it kind of became apparent that from a sequencing and construction standpoint, this was going to be simpler to do with the hard coat stucco and the thin brick because it's a very similar application. And then I also included a couple images below that, just showing a project that we recently completed in Salt Lake City with kind of a cropped in view of the window. So you can see the window is still recessed, at the jamb. So like Nan mentioned, the biggest difference is the 4-inch to a 3-inch. We basically detail these windows so they're still recessed into that same look, like a full brick reveal. So we feel like this is a pretty minor modification and it doesn't substantially change anything on the building. It still feels like brick, still looks like brick. It's very solid. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the applicant at this time? Excellent. I'm going to open the public hearing at this time. We do not have any comment cards. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak on this agenda item? Great. Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and we're going to move into executive session. Thank you, Alex. You can have a seat. Commissioners, what do we think? Any thoughts on this matter?
My only thought is, appearance-wise, it seems no problem, and probably it meets the standards. My only concern is that if I walk around town, I'm much more likely to see a building where a piece of thin brick has fallen off than to see a missing brick in the building. So my only concern is about sort of the durability of the thin brick versus the full brick. So that's the one concern that I have about it.
I'll just comment that the use of thin brick means that the recess at the doors and the windows are thinner, shallower. Appearance-wise, look fine. I don't feel like the thin brick has the durability of full dimensional brick over the course of time, but that's not in our purview. The appearance looks reasonable. It looks like the brick that we approved in September, I think it was. The only difference is, just as I said, all of the doors and the windows, that recess is just a tiny bit shallower than typical brick.
Yeah, I agree with Alan. My only concern is the long-term durability. I think day one it'll look very similar to a full brick veneer, but if you don't do it just right, those bricks can kind of start popping off pretty easily. So just ask the applicant to make sure that it's being applied properly and try to avoid that issue in the future. Any other thoughts, or is there a motion?
I will make a motion. Based on the information presented and discussed, I move that the commission approve this new construction modification as recommended by staff.
I'll second that.
Okay, great. We had a motion from Carlton and a second from Adrian. Babs. Aye. Mike.
Aye.
Adrian.
Aye.
Carlton.
Aye.
Jared.
Aye.
Alan.
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. So the motion passes unanimously. And thank you. Moving along to public hearing number 2 on the evening, the Beehive and Lion Houses, major alteration at approximately 67 East South Temple, case number PLN HLC 2024-00764. We have Noah Elmore here to present with the city.
Thank you, commissioners. This is a request from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the owner of the property, for approval to demolish a pair of 19th century doors and replace them with a replica of a different 19th century door. The proposal is part of an ongoing restoration to accommodate a museum function at the Beehive and Lion House's local landmark site, and to make alterations to restore features appropriately to select periods of significance associated with the site. Staff is recommending that the Historic Landmark Commission deny this request. The Beehive House is located at approximately 67 East South Temple at the northwest corner of the intersection of South Temple and State Street. This is noteworthy because this results in a south facade and east facade on the building that will be coming up. The project request is to demolish an existing pair of entry doors on the east facade and replace them with a replica of the 19th century door that was in this location previously. During a site visit in June and subsequent phone calls in the fall, staff discussed alternative proposals, such as relocating the paired entry doors to the south facade where they were installed initially. However, during those discussions, the applicant indicated their preference to maintain the proposal to demolish the doors and replace them. So how did we get here? In 1855, the Beehive House was constructed by Brigham Young, the second president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. After Brigham Young's passing in 1877, the Beehive House was deeded to one of his wives, Lucy Ann Decker. She subsequently sold the house to one of Brigham Young's sons, John W. Young, in 1888. This is the beginning of the John W. Young era. You'll see this highlighted in gold. This is one of our sort of key dates to keep in mind. It was during this period in which he underwent a Victorian-style remodel and addition with the Beehive house. When the Beehive house was originally constructed, on the rear, there was a single-story addition going from the rear on the south to the north that was perpendicular. That was demolished and replaced with a Victorian-style addition. And in addition to the addition, there was also a Victorian-style remodel in which, on the south facade, the original Georgian-style door was replaced with a pair of Italianate paired entry doors. Again, that's on the south facade. In 1893, John W. Young lost the Beehive house. A few years later, the LDS Church purchased the property at auction. It subsequently became known as the Lorenzo Snow and Joseph F. Smith era. Around this time, it was utilized more as a house for church presidents. Then from 1920 to 1958, the building was used as a boarding house for single LDS women. Then around 1959 to 1961, there was a major restoration effort by the LDS Church. This is again one of those key dates because on the south facade, the subject doors were moved to the east facade. So as part of that, there was a new door put in on the south in the Georgian style to replicate the earlier Georgian style. And as the paired entry doors were moved from the south to the east, the original John W. Young single entry door on the east facade was demolished, and these doors were installed in their place on the east facade where they have been to this present day. So what does all this look like? So this diagram shows the east elevation of the Beehive house. The purple dashed line shows approximately the delineation between the Georgian Brigham Young era and the Victorian John W. Young era. You'll see the original Brigham Young Georgian style on the left with some slight alterations at the time this was taken in 1934, whereas on the right side, you'll see the John W. Young Victorian edition. So this photo dates from approximately 1900. Here you'll see highlighted in red the original doors that still exist today in their initial location on the south facade. So they were there from approximately 1890 to around 1960. So here you can see this photo dates from around the 1960s, which shortly after the doors were moved from that south facade to the east facade. So the doors have been in this present location for over 60 years. So this helps to show kind of the whole picture here. You can see the current doors that still exist highlighted in red in their original location on the south facade. And then on the east facade, you can see highlighted in blue, one, their current location, and two, the proposed replica the applicant would like to install in place of the paired entry doors. So, based on that information and the analysis in the staff report, it is recommended that the Historic Landmark Commission deny the major alteration proposal. That's all I got.
Great. Thanks, Noah. Any questions for Noah at this time?
I guess I have a single question. If you could go back 2 slides, please, where it shows the elevations, the blue and the red. Were there reasons presented as to why the shorter door with the transom in blue was proposed as opposed to the 2 thinner doors that are taller? Was there comments by the church as to why they were going with one as opposed to replicating what was there?
So, as I mentioned early on, this is part of an ongoing overall restoration effort. So as part of that, the south facade is proposed to be restored to an 1870s Brigham Young look, whereas the east facade is aiming more for that Joseph F. Smith, Lorenzo Snow era. So as part of that, this diagram here is from that era. You'll notice on the east facade is that single entry door. So those paired oak entry doors aren't appropriate to this selected period of significance. However, the doors we're discussing today are still extant, and that door is not. That door was lost during the 1960s restoration effort.
So just to clarify, so in the 1960s, these doors were moved. Can you go through the timeline?
I know it's complicated.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get it straight because it was like one door and then they moved doors, so it was then two, right? But can you walk us through that one more time?
No problem.
Just because it's a lot of details. I'm
A
trying
lot
to
of
straighten
doors.
out.
So on the south facade, when it was built in 1855, it was a single Georgian style door. And there was a single story addition on the rear. When John W. Young came into possession of the home, he replaced the single Georgian style door on the south facade with these paired oak entry doors in the Italianate style. He also demolished an addition on the north, which is what you see here on your right. So then that was sort of the arrangement of the building until circa 1960, in which you'll see the original east door, sort of your bottom central here. That door was demolished. The south facade doors here were moved in its place, and a replica Georgian style door was put in this spot here in red.
So if I may add on to that, of the doors, this is the only set of doors that predates 1900, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions for staff at this time? Okay, great. Thanks, Noah. And if the applicant would like to present, now's the time. And please introduce yourself as you begin to speak.
I'm Emily Utt, representing the owner.
And Steve Cornell. Oh, right there. Okay. Steve Cornell, architect for FFKR.
Thank you for allowing us to come to speak tonight. This is, we have presented on this project before. This is an ongoing restoration. And like any complicated histories, the more we get into it, the more we learn. And sources that we thought were very clear, as we find more information, become sometimes confused and sometimes more clear. So restoration of this Beehive and Lion House really represents a kind of a unique preservation project. We have, the structures themselves really are the artifact that we are trying to share in this historic house museum. They are bigger than just a little something you can put in an exhibit case. As shared previously, these structures are being restored to several different periods of significance. Architectural elements are being restored, or in some cases reconstructed, to contribute to the accuracy of the time period of significance being interpreted on the interior of the building. I should start the presentation. There we go. Maybe. Okay. So the South Temple facade is being restored to its 1870 appearance. This includes reconstruction of Greek Revival elements on the Beehive House, reconstruction of a two-story wood structure at the offices, restoration of chimneys on the Lion House to the original configuration, and rehabilitation of the original adobe and stucco finish that we are learning is also in two different colors, because why not be even more complicated? Each of these elements together create a more accurate restoration. This 1870 restoration date for the exterior is continued on the interior of the building, including that interpretive focus. Visitors inside this portion of all of these structures will be interacting with spaces that are also restored to how they looked in 1870. So the sum of all of these elements together creates a high degree of architectural integrity and accuracy for this specific house museum restoration. The State Street facade is being restored to its 1890s appearance following the renovation and major addition that was done by John W. Young. This includes railings at the porch near the northeast corner that was eventually turned into a sleeping porch in 1921, something like that.
Lots of dates.
Lots of dates. And also the door that we are talking about tonight. Our application noted that there was a covered porch at this east entry in the historic documents. It's visible in the Habs drawings you see here. We are not able to reconstruct this porch because of site limitations, largely due to State Street being widened in 1961. The 1890s appearance is also echoed on the interior of the building. Visitors inside the building will be interacting with spaces that also reflect the way that they looked in this John W. Young era. Restoring the State Street door to its 1890s appearance is consistent with the period of significance already approved by this commission. The sum of these individual elements together creates a high degree of integrity. The door currently on the State Street entrance is historic to this building, but it is in the wrong location. The existence of the double door on the east elevation itself immediately created a false sense of history in the 1960s when it was installed, and that false sense of history has been perpetuated for more than 60 years. Despite the good intentions of that preservation committee, and really preservation in Utah was in its infancy when this house was being restored, the placement of that door in the east facade was a careless indiscretion by that committee that we are now trying to rectify. Identification of character-defining features is usually done by identifying those features with a high degree of integrity to a very specific period of significance. In its current location, the extant door has a very low degree of integrity to that 1890s period of significance. Meaning? So, National Register criteria lists 7 aspects of integrity that contribute to understanding what significance is. So, a few of these doors have really high integrity in 2. They have high integrity in materials because these are original doors, and they have high integrity in workmanship because they are built like an 1890s door should be built. However, they have low integrity of location because they are in the wrong location. They have a low integrity of setting because of the context of everything else happening around them. They have low integrity of design because the current opening was designed for a single leaf door. And you can see that clearly in this photograph where the header is offset. The header was designed for a door that is no longer in that opening. And it has low integrity of association because the people that would have used this door in 1890 are not the same people that we will be interpreting today as the Historic House Museum. Okay. Because this door is historic to the property, our mitigation plan is to salvage the door. It is part of the history of the building. Our plan right now is to add it to the church's permanent collection, and as we work on permanent museum collection, and as we work on the exhibits that will be taking place inside the building, this door then becomes one of the options to put it on exhibit to talk about how complicated and lengthy the history and occupancy of this home is. Restoring the 1890s door at the State Street facade contributes to the accuracy and integrity of the structure. The new doors will have the integrity of location, setting, design, and association that is not possible with the doors from South Temple that are now on the State Street facade. The new doors will also have integrity of materials and workmanship because we are building these using historically compatible appropriate materials and construction. Restoring the 1890s doors is in keeping with the underlying preservation approach to this project and is in keeping with already approved decisions and approvals by this commission. Requiring the existing door to remain in place contradicts the already approved periods of significance and approved restoration of this particular side of the building. There you go. That's all I have.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Steve, anything to add?
Well, it's a great summary, Emily. And, you know, don't be alarmed, because it took me about a year and a half to get my head around the, contortions here in this building. But the one thing I want to add is that on this facade, it was always the secondary facade. And, I appreciate Noah and his thoughtful interpretation of this. We're respectfully disagreeing with his recommendation. But this door, because it was always a secondary facade, it was always a simpler, it was a less distinguished opening in this building. And just having that double door on this opening indicates that it has a higher priority than it really does. And so our goal in historic preservation architecture is to not create a false sense of history. And this is something that's been, we've had this false sense of history for, 60 plus years in this building. And we're really trying to rectify that, that mistake that was made. So that's all I have to add.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the applicant at this time?
I'm curious, the proposed new door to be placed in that opening, what is the evidence? I mean, what evidence did you have to base what we're seeing here on? Because, well, of course you know that Secretary of the Interior standards say that lost elements of a building should not be recreated unless there is basically really good documentation so that you can make an accurate reproduction. So I'm curious to know, what did you have to go on this?
Did you take that?
Yeah, take that.
Well,
he designed this door. So
the 1934 Habs drawings, which document what that door looked like. Now, these drawings you'll see are less detailed than what the actual door on the left is showing. So we do agree that there is some liberty taken to what is being designed. You cannot pull that detail out of that simple line drawing there. The other piece of evidence we have is a photograph from the 1940s. I don't know if you've got that.
I don't think I didn't include that.
It should be in the packet. It was part of the original submission that we made. But we have a photograph of that door in the 1940s. There's 3 women standing out in front of that when it was used as a boarding house. And so we have, a good photograph. Again, it doesn't show us all the detail, but it supports what was drawn in 1934. And it also gives us some additional detail that we used to then generate this drawing. When generating this drawing, what we did was we followed, typical Victorian profiles and details when we were drawing the moldings, the casing around the door, the moldings. The major elements of this door match what was drawn in 1934, both the drawing and the photograph from the 1940s. But those very fine details are something that we have come up with based on the best information that we have.
Just to pause that, the image is on page 61 in our packet. Of course, there's someone standing right in front of the door, which always seems to happen.
It always happens, yeah.
Okay, this is just a call, but just suppose John W. Young were to not walk through the door, but walk past on the street after this door is installed. Yeah. Would he notice that could he tell as he walked by that the door had been replaced?
He probably never walked in this door, Alan, because he probably went through the front door. I'm kidding. That's just a bit of a joke.
My understanding was that actually functioned as the front door during the John W. Young period, but
that's not.
We're actually not sure.
Really? Okay.
There were multiple tenants in the house. So John W. Young lived in the house, but also other people were living in the house. We're also not entirely sure how much of the project he finished. The reason that John W. Young lost the home is he didn't pay his construction workers, and the house went into foreclosure. So
I guess what I'm basically saying is, would someone who lived in the house, would they notice immediately? I mean, do you feel confident that you have the evidence you have has allowed you to produce a good enough replica that a person who had lived in the house would not immediately notice that?
Yeah.
From the street, yes. I agree with that statement, that yes, no, they wouldn't notice the difference from the street. Obviously, the canopy, the porch canopy is gone, and that's just a restraint of the site that we have today. Someone walking up to the door and seeing the fine details, if they were accustomed to seeing those details, they might see that there is a difference, or it might differ from the original construction. But the details, again, they're consistent with the time period. They're Victorian in nature. They follow typical designs of that time. So, but the general proportions of the door match.
If John W. Young walked by today, would he notice that it wasn't the same doors?
Again, from the street, I don't think so, Alan. And the other thing is,
my point is that he would say, what's wrong? What's happened to the doors?
The double doors, yeah.
Well,
if a person from the
John
time
W.
period-
Young never saw the double doors in this location.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
John,
Oh,
yeah,
you're saying. I
yeah,
see what you're saying.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, is as we install this single door, the opening becomes narrower, and we have the chance to then rectify its position under that header, so it can be centered under that header, and that facade again can look appropriate with the structure above.
Yeah, John W. would be confused to see these double doors in this location.
Yeah.
But he would also be confused because of these multiple periods of significance. These doors never existed with the Greek Revival roof details as well.
Right.
Oh yeah. Okay. One more question I just have to ask. So, there's been talk about the south facade is being restored to an 1870 Brigham Young period. The east facade is being restored to an 1880 John W. Young period. When you say the east facade, do you really mean the east facade, or you just mean the John W. Young
The John
addition?
W. Young portion.
Yeah, it's where that line
Okay.
divides
So it's not
the
like
front and the back.
Side of the 1855.
No,
is gonna be done.
the inside of the 1850s portion is being restored to sitting room. And so John W. Young punched a door through a window in that 1850s sitting room. And because we want to restore the sitting room to Brigham Young, we aren't restoring the John W. Young porch door.
Yeah. And
This to get more complicated. Is this?
Very complicated.
And we do have instances on the building that have been approved by the commission where we're removing elements that were installed in the 60s. For instance, the cast iron, little fences up on the roof. We're removing those elements and replacing those with Greek Revival elements. And the Greek Revival elements we are replicating based on photographs that we have, pretty good photographs of those elements. But again, they are a replication of something that was there in the 1850s until probably the 1870s, when they were just deteriorating by that point, so they were replaced. But again, we have precedent in this project for removing something that's, more than 50 years old and replacing it with something that we're replicating to interpret an earlier era of the building.
So basically, this place has been remodeled several times, and you're just trying to get it back to the original, which
Has two different originals.
right.
Yes.
That is complicated. My question that I ask every time, and I never get a right answer, is how many bedrooms are there?
Which time period are you asking about?
I'm just talking about the whole building, because every time I drive by with a client, I try and point it out, and they always ask me that, and I can never answer.
Lots.
Well, yes, but then I can never get a straight answer as to how many wives there were either. So.
We know the height, I would guess there were, well, no, I'm not even going to guess. I'd have to go back and count the floor plans.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you were saying the double doors are going to be put on display somewhere?
That is the plan. We are working on our exhibits inside the building right
Oh,
now. And so
okay.
the hope is we know we will have one exhibit that talks about this evolution of the building. We've talked about doing a little 3D model that people can touch and pull apart and figure out. We've talked about other architectural salvage so people can see original adobe or other elements. And so these doors are one of the
It's
options.
going to be there, not like at the Pioneer Museum.
No, it'll be in the Beehive house. Yeah.
Thank you.
Or Lion House. We're figuring that out too. Same thing. Two different names. Yeah.
I do have a quick question. So if this were to get denied, how would you modify your plan with these double doors staying in place?
We would have to, there would be a little interpretive gymnastics for the interpreters for it to make sense to them as they are leading people on tours through the building.
Yeah, just to complicate the matter, if you walk through these doors today, you walk into a foyer, and should I even go into this? In the 1960s, okay, John W. Young renovated this back portion of the house in the 1890s, and it had this, and then he also renovated the main part of the house in the 1890s, but he installed this very beautiful wood paneling in that south portion of the house. Not only was the south door moved to the east location, but that paneling was moved to the foyer. So we have 1890s era features that were originally on the south entry as you came in that south entry to the Beehive house. That was all moved in the 1960s to the rear portion of the house. We're pulling out the paneling to restore the interior of that feature back to the 1890s. So we'll have this mismatch between an 1890s interior and the door that was installed there in the 1960s. So if you're following this and you're wrapping your head around this, good for you, because it took me a while to this all out. But it will take some gymnastics to communicate the correct interpretation of that space.
Yeah, and it seems like you'd have to do some upgrade to the doors to provide more security or functionality, or would they be basically ready to rock?
The door that's
gymnastics
there, yeah, the door itself is in fairly good condition. There has been some water leaks in that area over the years that we've been constantly repairing these doors.
Yeah, they'll get new hardware.
They'll get new hardware and new lock sets and things. Yeah.
But the original idea was it to update and remodel the whole thing once the it seemed to me the time frame was, we need to protect the temple, so we're going to go in there, and then, since we're doing that, we might as well redo the temple. But wait, there's this place, so let's do this as well. What else is going on there? Is it the most major architectural thing that's going on there?
So at this particular complex, the Beehive and Lionhouse complex, we have been doing research and in preparation for a major restoration like this for more than a decade. Mm-hmm. And the timing of it, if 3/4 of Temple Square is closed right now, we might as well just close the rest and really annoy everyone driving down State Street in South Temple trying to get anywhere for a while, and then it'll reopen. So the timing of it worked to just have it close at the same time, but this project has been in consideration for a very, very long time as a standalone significant restoration. And the overall focus of the project is one, stabilization. This is an 1850s adobe building, and it's been through a lot. And while we are in stabilizing, also a restoration to very specific time periods to aid in better interpretation of some of the oldest buildings in the state.
So a while back, I can't remember when, we did Brigham Young's grave. Mm-hmm. For that? Yep. And they were they were going to restore the metal fencing around there. And I think we said no to whatever they were doing, and they went ahead and did it anyway. And when I went there the other day with some clients, it was all locked up. So I'm wondering, if we tell you no, you'll do it anyway? And then my other question is, why is that grave locked up?
Yeah, so that project, I think what you're remembering is that the commission, that the church wanted to raise the fence to improve security, and the commission denied the request. Right. And as we were, there was, I think, a miscommunication of what we could remove to stabilize the wall underneath. The wall had to be rebuilt. Okay. That work had been approved. And so we removed the fence to start restoring the wall, and a story got around that we had demolished the fence, which wasn't, no, it's here. Yeah. So the fence, because that request was denied, we restored the fence, reinstalled it. So it was more of a timing miscommunication
Okay.
on that element.
So there's not-
I don't, so it's, yeah, so that project did follow the recommendation, the approval of the Landmarks Commission.
Okay.
I don't know why it's locked, and I was going to go ask church security tomorrow and tell them it needs to be open during business hours because it should be. I don't. Historically, I know they have locked it sometimes during the winter because of concerns about snow, but I don't feel like that's a concern this winter. So I'll find out what's going on there.
We will follow the council's recommendation, though, just to allay any concerns.
Back to the
there.
matter at hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do feel strongly about this. We feel like this is going to make it a better project, and but yes, we will follow whatever recommendation you provide.
So I think I'm generally understanding. I want to have the south temple facade be at the 1870s, the State Street, portion of that be at 1890s. If I'm remembering right, staff had some recommendations or thoughts on, okay, maybe you could swap doors. Can you tell us a little more about, what some of those thoughts were, and then what your rationale is, to go this direction, I guess. Does that make sense? I'm not remembering entirely what staff, recommended.
Yeah, and it's been a while, so I mean, Noah, if you want to come clarify, that'd be great. But I just don't remember some of those.
I know it's been a while, hasn't it?
What we were discussing at that time. So
I believe this was back in June, so it's been 8 months. But I believe on site we had discussed the possibility of taking these original 1890s doors, and instead of removing them from being on this building, relocating them to where they were initially installed on the south facade, so they could remain on the building where they've been.
And to us, that only perpetuates, again, the false sense of history, because if we're restoring the south facade to the 1870s, it's an anachronism to then have the 1890s doors that were installed there present for that 1870s interpretation. So that's why we decided to go this route, because we feel like it's a simple approach. It tells you exactly what time period we're interpreting. There's nothing that we have to sort of put an asterisk on and explain away. It just makes it simpler. And again, we understand, like, the wood paneling that's inside that east foyer is absolutely gorgeous. It is beautiful. It is something that we have fretted over about taking off, but we feel like the philosophy and the goals of the project override whatever level of compassion we have for some of these materials. That really is overriding that. It's a false sense of history in that 1890s foyer, in that foyer on the east side, to have those elements in place. It just looked different. It was secondary to that south entry foyer, and we feel like everything that's been moved over to that position is creating a false sense of history. So that's ultimately why we decided to go that route.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you. You can have a seat. Before we move into the public hearing, I should have done this earlier, but I just wanted to disclose that I have done work as a consultant for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with a past employer, including interviewing for this project, which we did not get. And also, me and Steve, I wasn't sure if Steve was going to present tonight, but Steve and I are former coworkers, and we wrote a book together. But I'm going to participate in this because I don't think that will sway my opinion either way.
We're not going to hold any of that against you, John.
Yeah. Can I ask staff to come up again? Because I'm not understanding why you denied this. I get the logic of this more so than denying this.
So it's outlined in this microphone's much louder than the other one. So it's outlined in the staff report. This doesn't meet multiple standards in Salt Lake City Code. For example, city policy is repair over replacement. The applicant has not indicated and in fact affirmed these doors are in fairly good condition. I would say excellent. So the doors do not merit repair. They do not merit replacement. There are several standards related to that. Additionally, it creates a false sense of history by the way in which On the south facade, there was a single entry door and these paired entry doors. Before that, there were the paired entry doors on the south facade, and on the east facade, there was a single entry door. Never in this building's history has there been a single entry door on the south and a single entry door on the east. That would be just a wholly original perspective of this building that has not existed in the site's history.
I would also just add that the doors they're within a period of significance, the building. And when we evaluate alterations to buildings, we consider whether or not it's within the period of significance and if it's a character defining feature. These doors are original to the structure, albeit in a different location. Restoration projects, I will be the first to admit, you will always run into something awkward like this. And so we understand their position, and we're holding the line on these original features.
So just a clarification then, the drawings that I'm looking at had the pair of doors that were taller, and then when were those doors placed on the building? What's the history of those taller
the pair of doors?
Without a transom, they were not this drawing. It's about three back.
But the double doors weren't original.
What's that?
The double doors weren't original.
Okay, so those taller double doors were not original.
I think that depends, as Steve alluded to, how you define original. They are original to the John W. Young era and have been at the site for over 130 years. They had been on the south facade for approximately 70 years, and then on the east facade in their present condition for over 60 years. So that puts them in this period of significance still. Despite moving locations, they have retained that significance.
Yeah, it kind of seems like we're just choosing periods of significance for, the desired period of significance of the owner on one side and the other. Those are different periods of significance. And in between those periods, the door happened to move to the other side. And if we represent those periods of significance, we'd lose the doors. That's my general understanding of it, right? So it's kind of a choice of, okay, we want this period of significance and we want this period of significance. What do we do with the doors, right? So that seems to be my understanding of it. I don't know if that
I think
helps.
that's a good summary, yeah. With that, we're going to open the public hearing. I have one card at this time from Cindy Cromer. So you have 2 minutes, Cindy.
Oh, I could spend more than that. First of all, let me say that I'm grateful that the staff has made a negative recommendation. Those are very uncommon. The last one I saw in a historic structure was at 865 South, 500 East. It was a while back. I'm also grateful that I don't have to make decisions like this on my own buildings. I'm just grateful if I've got something left that's historic and appropriate to the structure. So I usually try to say something that nobody else has said. And what's completely missing from this conversation is that moving these doors in the 1960s documents thinking about preservation at that time. If you will go back to the early days of Trolley Square, the place was full of architectural artifacts like Grandma's attic. That's what preservation was then. You took the part off and you moved it somewhere. So I think it's important to tell that story. The importance of this building is not about the architectural periods of significance and nuances between them. The importance of this building is who was there, what happened inside its walls, what happened outside in the immediate vicinity of the building. There were a lot of parades based on the pictures. And that's what's important. These doors were located where they are now intentionally. They've been preserved intentionally. They're part of the early fabric of this house. I lust after them. Okay? I said that. So we're losing the story here of how preservation came about in the 1960s, what people thought at that time. There's a story to tell about moving these doors, whether it's the story of Trolley Square or the story of relocating these doors. It's about keeping beautifully detailed artifacts. And I see these doors every morning as I drive down State Street. The likelihood of my seeing them if they're in a museum approaches zero. For the public, the wider public, to see these doors, they need to stay where they are. And I wish they were mine. Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy. That was the only comment card I had. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on this agenda item? Okay, great. I'm going to close the public hearing. The applicant has a chance to respond if they would like, or we can leave it at that. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to open the executive session. Once again, this is for us commissioners to discuss. And what do we think?
Well, I'll say that I'm of two minds, as maybe everyone is to some degree. First, I'd like to say that, I appreciate the church investing what it must be spending to restore the Beehive House, and for that matter, Temple Square generally, because it's going to be a very important thing for that entire area and for preservation. I understand both sides of what we're looking at here, and it's a bit challenging. I would challenge the idea to some degree that there is a secondary facade on this house. If anything, it could be said that amongst a few buildings in Salt Lake City, this is a landmark amongst landmarks in terms of history in the city. It's sort of like saying that Notre Dame de Paris has a secondary facade, and that may very well be true, but the secondary facade of Notre Dame is probably more important and more critical than the primary facade of most other buildings in Paris. I think in the context of Salt Lake City, this is something here too, because whether it's the south facade or the east facade of the Beehive House, it is one of the most prominent buildings on one of the most prominent corners in the city. And secondary versus primary loses some of its meaning in that context. So I would take that into consideration. I was discussing with Commissioner White a project that I'm working on before the meeting in Maryland. It's a building that was built in 1746. And it's similar to the Beehive House, although, with longer durations, has similar eras. It was built in 1746 by a ship owner. It has Revolutionary War history. In the 1830s, it was purchased by a painter and his wife, and the painter painted the main rooms on the first floor with murals across the walls that are still there. In the turn of the century, 1900, 1910, it was purchased by a railroad baron who came in and added Victorian features and radiant heat and things like this. And today the building has this very unique staging of the eras that you can see between the original construction and the Revolutionary period and this post-revolutionary period that spans the Civil War with the paintings that are extant and the Victorian features that were added in some areas. And for me, the history of the building is not 1746 or 1835 or 1910. The history of the building is a combination of all of those together and the amalgamation of all of the changes that have been incorporated into the history of that building that defines what that building is today across time. It would be a travesty, I think, to lose any of the remaining 1746 features. It would be a travesty to lose the 1835 murals that were painted. It would be maybe slightly less of a travesty versus those to lose some of the Victorian features that were put in 1910. And I see these doors and the eras of this building in a similar light, that what is extant and what has been there for so long is difficult to remove, even in the context of trying to restore elements of the historical integrity, as might be said, of the building. Because at that point in time, we got to question ourselves what exactly we're trying to do. Are we trying to recreate a building to the period that it was, which is a recreation? Or are we trying to preserve the building to what it means today through the entire history of the structure? That's how I approach it, and that's where the struggle for me is. So I'll leave it at that, and the commission can build on that if they so choose.
That was so well said. I agree with everything shared. I do know, just from chatting with Emily over the years about this project, I think I have an understanding of why this is happening. So I think the plan and the intention is to have different parts of the building represent the different parts. And it's so unfortunate that this east facade isn't representing the 1890s, because if it was, that would be easy. But I do agree. I think that if these doors were removed, like what Cindy said, we're never going to see them again.
And in many museums, don't they just make a notation that this is not the original door? Or the original door was moved? I mean, you can point that out and still keep them. Yeah, I'm seeing that side as well. Yeah, I am a little split on this as well. Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think as Carlton, you spoke, and also as Cindy spoke in the public comments, right? I was thinking of other buildings, a historic theater in particular, that has different elements of that are significant, but for entirely different periods, right? And I think it tells the story of the building and the story that it is in its entirety. So I tend to agree with Carlton, and I won't go on because he said it pretty well. But I think that's part of the story too, even if it doesn't all physically line up, right? It is a challenging thing to address because of that. But yeah.
Obviously, this is a nuanced project. We know that. It's also a nuanced owner in that they have their own interpretive program agenda. They also have a well-researched history department of their own. That's not normal for our applicants. And they have justification for doing what they want to do to the building that I think is understandable, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
I think with most of us here, this is just like, I flip-flopped 3 times in the last 15 minutes on this one. For me, I think it comes down to, I had been turning this over. I was laying awake at nights over this one, trying to figure out how do you make sense of a situation like this. I think the staff made good arguments that would hold up really well if this were one of the beautiful homes in the Avenues, but this is not just another home in the Avenues. This is the most significant house in Utah by far. And we can't approach it as just another house. And so the fact that these doors, I know I'd listened to Cindy and I'm just like, yeah, this does tell part of the story of preservation in Utah. But this is not a house that is about just representing things as people walk by. It tells a very specific story, a real central story to Utah's history. And the fact that it's a house museum, you can't hold a house museum to the same standards that you hold other buildings, because if you go to Mount Vernon, you will find out that there are a lot of changes that the Mount Vernon Ladies Association made to the house over time that have then been changed, because the overwhelming importance of Mount Vernon it's really significant. Mount Vernon is hugely significant in the preservation movement. But in the end, it is most important as the home of George Washington. And the Beehive House is our Mount Vernon. And so I think you have to say that as a house museum, we have to allow it to tell that key story that it is trying to tell. And the Beehive House, while it can tell a story about preservation, it's not the best place to tell that story. There are more important stories to be told in that house. The other thing about false history, which keeps coming up, and there is this idea that, well, if we remove those doors and we put in, reproduction doors, we've created false history. The fact of the matter, there is false history there already. Beyond Emily and Steve, I'm just guessing that nobody in this room knew before they looked at this material that those doors had not always been there. That those two doors, that everybody who has walked by and just thought those doors had always been there. That's the false history that we have all experienced over the years. And so to say that, well, to remove them, we're going to create a false history. Well, we all believe a false history because it's been there in front of us all this time. So when I was thinking about it, laying awake at night thinking about it, I thought, really what these doors are, they're an artifact. They are an artifact because they have been moved out of their context. They are a real important artifact because they're the original thing. They tell part of that story of that house, but moved out of their original location, they are no longer really an integral element of the house. They are an artifact that's been placed on the house. Not terribly different than if we had gotten a period door from across the street and put it on the house. And it's like, well, yeah, that's period appropriate for that, but it's not, it doesn't really belong there as far as the historic significance of the house. So I would argue, and so really my concern was like, well, but if the commission says, yes, those doors can be replaced with a replica of the original, then we have this beautiful piece, historic piece of the house. Does it go into the landfill?
No.
With the interior of the Salt Lake Temple? Or, I think you all know what I'm talking about. What happens to it? Because if we say you can remove it, then we have no control over what happens to it. But I have to say, as soon as I heard Emily explain, we plan to preserve this artifact as an artifact should be preserved in part of our interpretive display, because they help tell the story of the house, but they actually help tell the story better if they can be taken someplace else and contextualized than if they are in the wrong context. And then you have to try to explain why they're in the wrong context. But that is an option.
Yeah.
I realize that is an option, but I'm also like, I guess I'm saying if the church comes to us and they want to do their interpretation this way, I think it's absolutely a legitimate way to do it. And as long as the doors are being preserved, that piece of the house is being preserved, it's actually better preserved inside where it's not going to eventually fall apart and have to have a replica made of it than it is out there on the outside of the house where everybody who goes by gets the wrong interpretation.
But everybody that goes by does not know that it's two different owners. Everybody thinks that's just Brigham Young's house, and
oh yeah,
that's
I know.
where it all
Everybody
came down.
assumes the whole house was Brigham Young's and all of that, but
And they
so,
do. And if you've been in the church museum over there on West Temple, they do an amazing job showing different displays of how things were made and built in those eras and what have you. So no doubt they will do a wonderful job there. It's just I'm still torn between both ideas.
I'm still torn too, but I think if I look at it from a preservation standpoint, I think I have to say that preserving the artifact, which is what I think it really is an artifact. It is not an historic. It has already been removed from its historic context. So, forcing the church to leave it there because we think it's such an important artifact, I'm like, as long as the artifact is preserved and explained, then it's just as well someplace else because it doesn't really belong there. And I think we all want it to be preserved. We don't want to see it disappear, and yet we all know it's in the wrong place. Mm-hmm. And I'm just guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing in 1960, the committee that restored the Beehive House at the time probably said, oh, we're tearing out these beautiful front doors on the building. How can we preserve these doors? Because we hate taking them out, but we got to take it back to the Brigham Young period. What if we just stuck it on the side of the house? And I think maybe to force the church to keep those doors there is to sort of perpetuate that same idea. They're so beautiful that we got to keep them there, even though from a preservation standpoint, from a telling the story of that building is preeminently situated to tell.
Uh-huh.
Those doors shouldn't be there.
So you're going to vote with staff?
No.
You're going to vote against
Maybe.
staff?
Did I not make myself clear?
I understood you, Alan. Yeah, it's interesting because we have this narrative. Okay, it's already in a false sense of history, but then the question in my mind is, okay, well, does that false sense of history of their placement where they are now become the history, right? Is there any false history, or is it all just history? That's then the question in my mind that is so hard to grapple with.
And I'm arguing, yeah, it has become part of the history of the building, but I'm just arguing that this isn't just any building that we can just say, well, it just has layers and layers of history. There are certain layers of history that far outstrip any other layers of history that I think that which is why it's a museum. Very few of the projects that come before us are worthy of being a museum. And this is one that is, because it has a specific story to tell. And I think the church needs the allowance to tell that story. So that's my take on it.
So you should make the motion.
Adrian, you look like you're
I actually have a question for Emily and Steve. Can I do that during the executive session?
Yep, for sure.
What is your plan for the 1890s interpretation of the Beehive House for the museum? And is there a way to bring in these doors in any capacity, whether they stand in that space or there's pictures and a narrative around this? How can that be talked about?
There's two things we are doing. In this 1890s edition on the home, we have found that there are two stories that really rise to the level of a significant story we want to tell. Part of that edition will be interpreted to how it looked in October 1918. I can give you, I think it's October 3rd. We've got a date. When Joseph F. Smith received what is now in the church's Doctrine and Covenants is Section 138. So a canonized revelation was received in that home. So part of that house will be restored, part of that portion interior will be restored to 1918, so we can tell that particular story of Joseph F. Smith in his bedroom receiving this revelation. The other part of that portion of the house that is so significant is the boarding house era. So between 1920 and 1958, hundreds of young women coming to Salt Lake City looking for work or for education lived in that home. So we are restoring different rooms to tell the stories of specific women who lived in that house and how living in this massively historic home changed their lives. And so restoring the exterior to the 1890s helps us tell the story of a specific date in 1918 as well as specific dates in the 1930s up through the 1950s. In the Lion House, we are designing a kind of an introductory exhibit to explain how you are going to be moving through this massive building with multiple time periods of story. And so in that particular area, we are planning one exhibit room that helps us tell the story of the evolution of the house. So we are just in concept phase right now. So the idea would be we would put in architectural elements that have been discovered, either removed in the 1960s during that restoration and have been in storage for 50 years, elements that we're finding in the house today, I think I mentioned earlier, we've talked about creating a 3D model that visitors can kind of pull apart so they can see how the house looked in the 1850s, and then how it was modified in the 1870s, and then modified again in the 1890s, and rooms added, when plumbing was added, all of those kind of details. So I would imagine that these doors will end up in that exhibit talking about the evolution. And I'm also pushing our team to talk a little bit about the preservation of this building, how massively significant the 1960s were in saving these buildings from demolition. Both of them, both the Beehive House and the Lion House, were too close for demolition, I think, for any of us. So we want to use these doors to talk about what that restoration committee did in saving that house from demolition.
So in that introductory exhibit, is that big enough to actually put the doors in there?
Yeah, so that introductory exhibit will be where the Lion House Pantry restaurant was historically.
You taking out the restaurant?
Oh, I shouldn't have mentioned, sorry.
I love that place.
The other thing we're also going to do on the exterior of the building is we are also designing interpretive markers right now that will allow visitors, so even if they are just walking down the street and don't want to go and be in the exhibit and take models apart, that there will be a number of interpretive plaques around the building describing the evolution and the history and why in the world the Beehive is gold and why the Lion House is yellow and all of those kinds of details.
I'm not of the faith. What was the magical revelation that happened there?
Section 130, it's a revelation that Joseph F. Smith received, a vision of the dead. So he saw the great ones of the past waiting their opportunity for baptism in the afterworld. And so Joseph F. Smith received this revelation in October 1918. It was canonized in the church's works. And then he passed away in the home about 6 weeks later.
Oh, okay.
So it's a very personal family story, but also a story that affects, that revelation impacts the way that Latter-day Saints approach temple worship today.
Interesting.
So it's central kind of to our theology.
I'm speaking for myself, but I think other people would probably agree that it would be a lot easier to approve this if we knew that the doors would be preserved and available for viewing and appreciation rather than like going into the vaults and never to be seen again. That is my primary concern, that if we do approve this to be removed, then that history just disappears. So if
I wonder if we could approve that with the condition that the doors
I don't know if we're allowed to do that, Kelsey.
Property, right? Is that
I don't think
destructive to your objectives, right? Or is that?
This is where we all turn to the other table.
I don't think so.
I don't know.
I'm not sure we can do that. Now, I've been either a planning commissioner or historic landmarks commissioner for a very long time and worked with the church when they were doing City Creek for 13 months. Oh, that was hard. And I must say, every time they came to testify or explained what they were doing, they did exactly what they said they were going to do. And it gave me a lot of faith, not to pun, but a lot of faith in the church, particularly when they took down ZCMI. And they numbered and took all of those iron archways and pillars and what have you and meticulously preserved them and put them back up. So like I say, anytime I've ever had to deal with the church about restoring things, they have kept their word. So I'm not worried, but I'm worried that I'm not sure we can put some kind of order on there that they have to do this.
Yeah, you can't place that type of condition on the
Okay, thank you,
approval.
good.
So if I may, Alan, you make a very good argument, actually, for the other side. I have a second question for you, if you don't mind. Given the details that we do have and the photo, which doesn't provide a lot of detail, doesn't reflect what the one-line sketch shows from the original plans, how confident are we that a replication or interpretation of the replication would be an accurate application for replacing the doors?
That's why I asked the questions that I asked of Steve about replicating the doors, because I've done some replication on my own house, and it is really, really tricky business. And I don't know how we judge that. I know Steve's a professional, and so I tend to trust his opinion. And I mean,
Yeah.
and that's why I asked, like, from the sidewalk, because that's I guess that's sort of my standard of, like, you know, if the original occupants from the sidewalk wouldn't write off notice that it wasn't the same thing, that I'm like, then we're probably pretty close.
We have good sketches of it, right? There's not great photos, but I would say that we could be confident that, you know, they're going to invest in quality, right? They're not going to cut corners on trying to replicate it well. So that's
No, I don't.
Yeah,
but it's a concern. It's a real concern, I think. You know, because it could be, well, we're just doing something that's sort of period appropriate, and I'm like, well, that starts to miss the mark if it's just period appropriate and we're actually discarding doors that are from the period. You know, then it starts to tip this delicate balance that we're walking right now. So.
I guess the question is, like, do we want them to have this asterisk for the museum interpretation? Leave the doors, and part of the docent tour is this conversation about these doors and their origin story and all of that, or not? Because that's the whole request, is they want us to approve the removal for the sake of the interpretation of the museum.
All right, I've walked by this site many, many times. I've been to the restaurant just right around the corner. There's a lot of different kinds of doors. There's the oak doors, there's the darker doors, there's doors with transoms, there's double doors, there's taller. They all, you know, when we say not true to its era, not true to the 1870s, 1890s, 1960s. I mean, there are a lot of different looks to these doors. That's a comment. Another comment is, when you take a door out of its frame, it's no longer a door. It's you know, to say, you know, we're going to keep it, and, you know, that's what the door looked like. It's something less than it's meant to be, because it's not in its frame. The one image that I glommed onto was I think it was the third or fourth image that was presented, and you had the two single doors that were narrower, but they were taller. And it's not just the door that we're talking about, but it's the fenestration right and left of them, that entire tableau looked a certain way, had a certain pattern. When you take that tall, skinny opening and you introduce a transom, and then you have a door, now the door is not a pair of monumental doors, it's a single, more common, like today doors. So that, to me, that was like, I don't want to do that. That doesn't feel right. So I've heard both sides. I understand both sides. I know that we're, as a body, we're to maintain the history of the building. You know, that's what our purview is. And I'm not certain what the right answer is for this. A part of me is, let's keep the existing doors exactly like they are. If they're damaged, if they're not working, if they don't function properly, let's replicate them so that they're, you know, they look and feel to everyone that's looking at them like the doors that are existing now. The other half of me is, there's the 1870s and the 1890s and you know, the changes. So I'm just not certain. My gut tells me, let's keep what's there.
Yeah.
Let's replicate, if we need to, if we have to, what's there, let's keep the size and the shape and, you know, the physicality of the doors rather than introducing a different door to fill the door frame.
So you make the motion.
I've made two already this evening.
That's okay.
Is there more discussion that people want to have?
Yeah, I just, there's a reason why staff recommended to deny. There's a very straightforward reason. And the reason is that it's changing something that ought not to be changed.
Yeah.
For what the staff believes, and I think I agree with them, for not a real legitimate reason.
Yeah.
But it's you know, that, you know, when I see the double doors and the replica door, but it's not a replica door, it's a different door.
Mm-hmm.
Why not replicate the doors that are there? That's the part that I didn't quite understand. And so I can't see where approving something that's a bit different again, because this house has gone through multiple renovations. I don't see where that's helpful to the history of the homes, both of them really.
Yeah, I'm just imagining myself going on the tour, and I think these doors could be a topic of conversation that would actually be insightful and interesting, that talk about the history of the building. And so if we remove that, no one's going to think twice about the door. But if we vote to keep the doors, then that becomes a topic of conversation as a part of the door, or as a part of the house and the tour. So
I just want to respond to your comment about the staff's recommendation. I think there's some good reasoning in what the staff did, but I think there's a fundamental flaw, and that is, and that's what I saw as I read through it, is it goes through and it says, you know, according to the standards this, according to the standards that, according to the standards this. Those are all based on the supposition that the element you're talking about is still in its original location, that it hasn't already been moved someplace where it's completely out of its historical context. And so it would all be I think the staff recommendation would be really solid, except for this underlying fact that these doors were not there historically. They didn't get there till 1960. And so they are not part, even though they're older than 50 years old, which is generally the standard for historic, they are not part of the historically significant period of this building. And so it means that all of those arguments, as good as they are, fall apart, because the basic premise that these doors are actually historically in the right place is faulty. And so once you look at it that way, and then I think then all those otherwise solid arguments don't really make any sense anymore.
Say that last part again, please.
Well, once you realize that these doors have been moved out of their context, out of their original context, they're an artifact pasted on the building. They're no longer actually an integral part of the building until 1960, and that is not the historically significant period of the building. The historically significant period is much earlier. So all those standards that say, well, rather than replace a door, you should repair it. You know, it's like, well, yeah, but that's assuming that the door you're talking about is in the original building that it was built for, in the original place, that it hasn't been moved to a different location. Because the whole idea is that you're seeing on the building, you want to be as original and as authentic as possible. And we're already starting out with an inauthentic element in the building. And to say that now it has to be authentic as possible when it's completely divorced from its original context, I think is where those arguments fall apart.
So if we
As far as following the standards go,
Would it be helpful if I summarize the 5 standards that we're talking about? Or would that just be complicating the matter? Because it's already in the staff report. But just so we're all on the same page. Okay, there's 5 of the 10 standards that the staff report says, or 11 standards that the staff report says do not comply. The first one is number 2, the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. The commentary there was that these are character-defining features and removing them does not comply. Number 3 is all sites, structures, and objects shall be recognized as periods of their own time. Alterations that have no historical basis and which seek to create a false sense of history or architecture are not allowed. The commentary in the staff report was that they're original to the John W. Young era, so therefore they are products of the period of significance of the building. So that would not comply to remove them. And we've kind of addressed some of the nuance here as we've discussed. Number 4, alterations or additions that have acquired historic significance in their own right shall be retained and preserved. So the staff report is saying that these doors have significance in their own right, so removing them would not comply. Number 5 is distinctive features, finishes, and construction techniques or examples of craftsmanship that characterize a historic property shall be preserved. So the commentary is that these do present the Italianate detailing, and it would destroy an original character-defining feature. And then number 6 is a little longer, but it's talking about deteriorated architectural features. That's where we discuss repairing rather than replacing. If you are replacing them, it should be based on substantiated by historic, physical, or pictorial evidence rather than on conjectural designs. And the staff report said that there's no damage, therefore this would not comply. Noah, is that fair? Okay. I will allow you to comment. Yeah, briefly, if it helps clarify.
I'll be brief. This request is not inconsistent with other approvals that we've gotten on this project. We've removed features on the building, Victorian era features, especially on the south facade that had been there for, over 100 years. The cast iron detailing on the roof lines. We removed those and we're replacing them with Greek Revival details, elements that we've replicated based on photographs. So this is not unlike that same request that you've previously approved. We understand all of the arguments around this, but again, to Alan's point, we feel like it's already a false sense of history. So restoring something that's creating a false sense of history just doesn't seem to make sense. And it seems to counter some of the other standards that we are following and trying to follow. So that's my comment.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
So, if I may.
Yeah.
You make a compelling argument, but I guess I'm not quite there for two reasons. The thought that the doors are an artifact in this location because they've been moved here, and they're not the original in that location. If this request was a little different, and these doors had not been moved in the 1960s, and they were still on the front of the house, and the request was to take them out of that location and replace them with a single door commensurate with the 1855 construction, it's the same question, but in a different location. And I'm not sure that we as the commission would look at that in the same way and say, these doors have been here for 60 years versus these doors have been here for 120 years, and they're not the original in either location. So we're fine taking them out in the front of the house, just as we would on the side of the house. So I have some reservations about that. The other thing that I have some issues with, and this is part of the reason why I asked about the matching, if the intent is for historical integrity and matching the original structure of the building or the doors and the whatnot, the architectural detail that we've been presented with is the proposal doesn't reflect what's shown in the drawing. There's not a triangular pediment over it, which is clearly shown in the drawing. The photo that we have is from an era where there was apparently a covered porch over this area, so obviously that had been either not built or lost at some point in time. If we were to go that direction, personally, I would like to see something that is more reflective of what we know is the historical design versus what's been proposed. So.
If I may, just a final comment. I think we all as a commission acknowledge that there's been 3 major changes so far. That east has moved to south, south has been changed, 60s did something different. Where do we draw the line and say, this is what these houses are, period, and say this is it, acknowledging that there have been changes prior to now. What my fear is that if this commission was around in the 1870s, 1890s, would we have said, no, you can't change those doors, you can't move them from here to there, it's not right, it was meant for this elevation now, no, let's not do that. We weren't, I'm old but not that old. I guess my point is that we've had 3 iterations. We can either draw a line in the sand and say, this is it, this is what we're going to protect moving forward, or we're going to make another concession and say, yes, with the good arguments that were made, yes, we're going to make one more change, which to me diminishes the historic value of the homes to date. So that's I think that's my viewpoint, that there have been changes to the houses that have been made. Let's say, okay, this is the line, and this is what we're going to protect moving forward.
I'll make a motion. Shall we? Or any more? Is that okay?
I want to make one more.
Oh, yeah,
comment.
yeah.
As the chair, I have that prerogative. I just want to thank Noah for the staff report. I think it was very in-depth, and there's a lot of really tough issues here, and I just appreciate the detail, and thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go with staff's recommendation, and based on the information presented and our discussion, which was very helpful, I move that the commission deny this major alteration application as recommended by staff.
Please point out the actual case number. I think that's important.
Okay, PLNH LC 2024-00764.
I'll second that.
Okay, we had a motion by Jared and a second by Mike. Babs?
So if you vote yes, that means you're in favor of the staff report.
Yes, a yes vote would be to deny.
I'm going to vote yes.
Okay. Mike? Adrian?
Aye.
Carlton?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
Alan?
No.
And I am voting no as well, which brings us to 5-2. The motion passes. Thank you. Yeah, let's take a quick 5-minute break for everybody. 7:20. we have public hearing number 3, rezone at approximately 128 North N Street. That's PLN PCM 2024-01079. And Alicia is here to present.
Yes, okay, testing, that works. Good evening, yeah, my name is Alicia. I'll be representing the Planning Department in consideration of this proposal. And what we are talking about is a zoning map amendment at 128 North N Street from SR1A to RMF 30. I promise that no discussion of doors will be necessary in consideration of this proposal. We try to spread those out. I do want to point out, though, that the project architect working on this proposal, Kenton Peters, is here. He doesn't have a formal presentation to give the commission, but he's here to answer questions and provide insight from the applicant side as needed. Okay, here's the site we are talking about. This is in the Avenues Historic District, just south of the corner of 3rd Avenue and N Street. Currently, this is zoned SR1A, Special Development Pattern Residential, along with most of the surrounding neighborhood, immediate neighborhood. And the applicant is requesting a zoning amendment to rezone this property to RMF 30, Low Density Multifamily Residential District. Here's the property in the surrounding historic context. The property in question is an eligible contributing building currently, as are most of the surrounding properties, with the exception of the abutting property on the north side, which is out of period, as those are new townhomes. The proposal details, so the purpose of this rezone is to add an infill development, 3 rental units to the rear of the existing lot. This is the current site as looking at it from N Street. There's currently a historic 4-plex building, and that is the eligible contributing structure on the property. That property would not be modified or altered in any way as part of this proposal. And staff is recommending approval with conditions. Here are some more pictures of the subject site. So to the rear of the existing 4-plex, there are these freestanding garage units. These are not eligible, not historic accessory structures. Not contributing, thank you. So there are, the top photos are the ones on the north side of the property, on the northeast, and the applicant is proposing to demolish those to make room for the 3 additional units. And on the bottom left is the view of the rear of that 4-plex from the back of the lot, and as well as the shared driveway, which is shared with the condominiums. There are 10 condominium units just on the south side of the property. And then the last photo are the 2 additional detached garages in the southeast corner of the lot, and the applicant is proposing to retain those, or plans to retain those. And I don't know why it is not moving to the next slide. Okay, there we go. For a little bit of neighborhood context, these are the 2 buildings on either side, next door neighbors of this 4-plex. So to the south is those Notting Court condominiums that I just mentioned. They include 10 condo units, and the building sits at about 30 feet in height currently. And then on the north side are these newly finished townhomes that just finished construction in the middle of 2024. They contain 6 units and are 35 feet in height. For a little bit more of neighborhood context, this top photo is N Street looking out from the front of the subject property, and then 3rd Avenue across from the subject site. So as you can see, most of the surrounding neighborhood is a lot of 2-story, some 1-story single-family homes with a few small apartment complexes mixed in. So what would RMF 30 effectually change? The building height the standards would change. Currently, the max height is 23 feet in SR1A, and RMF 30 buildings can go up to 30 feet. Lot area standards would also change. RMF 30 does allow for a little bit more bulk and density than SR1A. So for SR1A, you need 5,000 square feet for a single family home, or 4,000 per unit to build a twin home. Whereas in RMF 30, a property owner only needs 2,000 square feet of lot area per dwelling unit. RMF 30 also allows additional building forms that are not currently permitted in SR1A. This includes a few different types of multifamily buildings, including row houses and sideways row houses. And RMF 30 also permits multiple buildings on a single parcel without needing to have each of the buildings have street frontage. And then the last main thing that RMF 30 would change is that this zone allows for bonus units when preserving a principal structure to promote infill development without demolition of primary structures. General plan compliance, so citywide plans, including Plan Salt Lake, Thriving in Place, and Housing SLC, these plans all call for and advocate for moderate density increases within existing neighborhoods and gentle infill development and more rental housing opportunities in every neighborhood. So staff finds that this project is in compliance with guidance from the general plan. We also did look at the Avenue's future land use plan. As you can see on this photo, that yellow square is where the subject property is located. It is designated on the future land use plan as appropriate for low density development, which is described as 4 to 8 units per gross acre. This block is already at a higher density than that calls for, along with most of the surrounding neighborhood is at a higher density than this future land use map calls for. However, because of this project's compliance with the general plan, staff have determined that a future land use map amendment is not needed for this project. The community benefit. So this project meets the criteria that to provide housing that aligns with the current or future needs of the community as determined by the general plan. The proposed community benefit that the applicant is putting forth is that all of these additional units shall be 2-bedroom units to provide appropriately sized rental options. Staff does find that the proposed added housing is consistent with housing needs, as I mentioned earlier, outlined by citywide plans. And if City Council ultimately determines this is acceptable, they will enter into a development agreement with the property owner to ensure that that agreed upon benefit is provided. Okay, as we get into public comments, I did want to provide a little bit of context here. So this was initially submitted, I think, back in October, and the original proposal that the property owner wanted was to rezone this lot to RMU 35 and add 5 additional units on the lot where the existing garages are with no additional side or rear setbacks. That obviously has changed, but I did want to let you know that this is what was sent out to residents, and this is what the project looked like during the public comment period. So I did receive a few comments in support of this rezone. Those included residents that felt that this was a needed housing type and more mid-sized housing is needed as the city grows. A few residents were excited about the prospective development without loss of existing housing and no displacement of current tenants. The Greater Avenues Land Use Committee wrote in support of this project that it is consistent with the existing development pattern of the neighborhood, and that increased density is supported by access to high-frequency bus routes in the neighborhood. The vast majority of comments that I received in opposition to this project referenced this next door project, these newly finished townhomes on the abutting property on 860 East 3rd Avenue. You may already be familiar with this project. It was the site of the previous historic gas station, and it was approved for a rezone to RMU 35 in 2020. However, construction of the townhomes was not completed until 2024. Yeah, the comments that I got referenced this project because many of the neighbors and the surrounding residents felt that this was not compatible with the neighborhood, was not a project that met housing needs in the community. They are, as I understand, still empty. They're for sale units, but they're highly unaffordable. Many residents cited that, and they, because of this project, expressed concern and are now very wary of new housing projects and increased density in this neighborhood because they do not want a repeat with similar results. Other comments included potential air and sunlight impacts on neighbors, especially with the initial proposal of a 35-foot building, and accessibility and availability of parking on site. And this is particularly from the condo units that do share that drive access. They're concerned about being able to access their parking both during construction and then after these potential units are built. So after the public comment period and after receiving this feedback as well as staff recommendations, the applicant chose to revise their proposal and took recommendations from staff to request RMF 30 as a more appropriate district for this neighborhood and this project, and scaled their project down to 3 units instead of 5. And then RMF 30 would require those side and rear setbacks. They have also addressed additional parking considerations by proposing to retain that southeast garage. This project did go to Planning Commission last month, and Planning Commission found or agreed that this potential infill development aligns with current and future needs of the community as determined by the general plan. Commissioners found that requiring 2-bedroom units was an appropriate community benefit to provide a middle housing type needed in this neighborhood. And Planning Commission recommended approval for the zoning map amendment with the condition that the City Council enter into a development agreement to ensure the agreed upon benefit, which is that each of the newly built units provides a minimum of 2 bedrooms, is provided prior to a certificate of occupancy being issued for any building within the future development. Next step, so after this meeting, the proposal will be reviewed by City Council with recommendations from Historic Landmark Commission and Planning Commission. And if the City Council does adopt this zoning map amendment, the applicant will then bring this proposal back to HLC to seek approval for the new construction. So recommendation, as I stated before, staff does find that this proposed zoning amendment complies with applicable master plan policies and initiatives, and the scale of the proposed development is appropriate and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And so based on the information and findings presented, planning staff recommends approval with conditions as outlined in the staff report. So setback for RMF 30 would be 6 feet on one side and 10 feet on the other. So that north property line is where they're wanting that 6-foot setback. Yes, so each of these 3 units would have an attached garage, as well as the 2 attached garages in the southeast corner. And just to the left on this tentative site plan of the new units is an additional space that, for visitors, for additional parking, and for storage needs of the current tenants in the fourplex.
Absolutely, ask these into the mic, please.
Sorry, can I just jump in? So with the map amendment, we don't need development plans because it's just a request for the zone. And so at a later date, they'll come back for new construction from the Landmark Commission. Yep.
This is just to demonstrate what would be possible given the potential new zoning district.
Yeah, we haven't really gone into design yet because we don't know if we can even proceed with the project. But we'll deal with that. Let me add a few things. Alicia has covered it really well. Just wanted to emphasize the existing density to the north, the townhomes that you saw in the photo that the commission approved back in 20. And then those are 35 feet high, 6 units there with their parking lot abutting the north property line of our property. Then the condos to the south, 30 feet tall, coming right up to about 10 feet from the south property line of our of the applicant's property. So we've got density on both sides. What we're looking at is there are 4 existing units in the fourplex that remains in front, and adding 3 more with our maximum height allowed of 30 feet, as Alicia said. So we don't feel like we're incompatible with what's happening around us.
How tall is that primary building in the front, the fourplex?
I'd guess 24.
Yeah.
I
So
think
these
that's
will only be slightly taller, but one of the issues was the shadow lines. Where are the shadow lines going to be?
Shadow lines would be into the parking lot of the townhomes to the north, because they are...
Well, that's not really going to affect anything.
No, not at all. And our rear property line to the east, setback is, I believe we got 15 feet required there. And the SR1A residential properties to the east, the houses are set to close to, that'd be on O Street. So there really isn't a shadow issue there.
Okay. Thank you.
Alicia mentioned maintenance of parking stalls. That was an issue some of the residents had questioned. We'll have 5 enclosed, 3 underneath the dwelling units on the north and the 2 existing on the southeast corner. Relevant historically is that the street exposure is completely unchanged. You'll see the existing historic thing. These will be tucked in the back. It'll be hard to even see.
How big of a lot is the whole thing?
It's about 11,000 square feet.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And just overall, we think we're compatible with the density and that we're complying with the housing goals of the city, and that we'd be of the opinion that there's no adverse effect on the neighboring SR1A, and in fact, it will bring a little bit more vitality to the neighborhood, especially in the fact that bringing in 2-bedroom units might allow more of a family mix, young couples with kids, as opposed to the usual 1-bedroom single young person kind of renter, but that's all speculation.
Great. Any more questions for the applicant or staff?
Just want to clarify. So this is just a recommendation from us on the zoning change, but any final project proposal would come through us, right?
Correct.
And honestly, my only concern that I'm seeing here is that this says that they can have 35 feet the building can be 35 feet, but the building in front of it is actually shorter than that.
30 feet.
30 feet,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I apologize, yeah.
So it's only like 3 feet taller, right?
Something like that.
Yeah,
That's
about that.
that's my concern, is the only thing that I'd want to see here is something that I couldn't see, because already I think that poor little fourplex there is just so overshadowed. That picture along the street there does not look like the avenues to me. It does not have the avenues feel, and adding more mass there. So I guess my question is would we be able, does the Landmark Commission have the ability to say no to a 35 or 30-foot building if we felt like that was too tall for for the adjacent buildings?
I can answer this one.
Thanks.
Yeah. You do have that authority to reduce the height
So when it comes
through
to
the new construction
final
process.
project, we could say, we like it, but it's a little bit too tall.
Potentially, yeah. I think you would have to take into consideration the development agreement entered into by City Council if they were to approve this with the number of bedrooms that they're hoping to achieve, and whether or not like a reduced floor area would impact that. Like
Also,
floor height
sorry,
is what I'm trying to say. Sorry, Kenton, go ahead.
Also, I'd argue that the distance set back from the street, just the parallax view, that even a 30-foot high building would not be all that visible and would not be overwhelming of the existing structure. And then part B of my response too would be, that would be something that when we come back to you with actual architectural design, then you can hammer us on that kind of stuff. And we would provide you with actual, actual street facade elevations, but also perspective views to illustrate the visual impact of a proposed design back there. And then, that's where the commission can really dig into the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's basically what I'm asking is, do we have that authority to make that kind of determination, even if the zoning would allow it? Yeah. I'm guessing that when they put in those townhouses next to it, I don't know, somehow they convinced the commission that it was not look like a huge block.
Yeah.
It ended up, really having visual impact. So.
Absolutely. On my experience serving on the commission, we definitely got into that kind of review and analysis and putting requirements on an applicant.
Okay.
Yeah.
So our hands are not tied by the zoning itself. Yeah.
Do you happen to know the height of the condos on the south side of that site, roughly?
They're 30 feet.
Okay.
And they're 30 feet right to the front setback and all along the sides. You can see that photo, the visual mass of those things. And then, of course, to the north is 35 feet and just unrelieved by any step backs.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you both. At this time, I'm going to open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak has 2 minutes, and I have one comment card from Cindy Cromer.
I spoke at the Planning Commission meeting, and I sent you those remarks. Looking at the context here with condos to the north and the south, the development pattern here is established. There is no better way to protect a building than to divide it into condominiums. I've watched as people try to rejoin the ownership interests, and that is extraordinarily difficult. So what's going to happen here is the 6 units to the north and the units to the south that are also condominiums, and that's it. So I don't think this is an unreasonable request, and the SR1A is a very unreasonable zone anywhere, except maybe on an interior block or something like that. So my focus at the Planning Commission was last minute because the community benefit, which I participated on the Thriving project, and the community benefit that I was so excited about has morphed into just about anything that we have enough of already that we might need. So when I looked at the end of January at the number of vacant two-bedroom units in 84103, there were 78. When I looked today, there were 75. That's consistent with we're now past the first of the month. Two-bedroom units are in demand. I get requests for them all the time. What we really need here is a less expensive unit of housing. We need the 80% of AMI in this highly desirable neighborhood, and I just don't accept that a two-bedroom unit, two-bedroom, one bath, is not a community benefit. Cowboy Partners has built an entire building of them because they're so marketable, and there is absolutely no guarantee that families, which would mostly be a custodial parent and a single child, will live in those units. So that's where I'm just saying this has gotten off course. That is a city council determination. The Planning Commission, in my opinion, got off course talking about compatibility. So everybody needs to stay in their lane. Yours is design review here and a recommendation about whether this zone is appropriate. I would tell you that the zone is very appropriate, but we need a community benefit that matches the community need, and I would argue that the two-bedroom, one-bath apartment does not match our community need. Thanks.
Thank you, Cindy. That was the only comment card I have. Is there anyone else in the room who wishes to speak to this agenda item? Okay, I'm gonna close the public hearing. I don't know if there's anything you would like to say in response to that. Hearing nothing, let's open the executive session. Any thoughts?
No, I was going to make a motion.
I will make one comment just before you do. I think in this particular case, the rezoning is appropriate, especially given the buildings that are around it. However, I do have the minor reservation of seeing other types of zoning creep their way into historic districts of this sort incrementally. We've dealt with a lot of projects in relatively recent history where there's one or two buildings left surrounded by much larger residential buildings, and it's this creeping rezoning that contributes to that situation. It's just something to be wary of as we consider rezoning, especially in SA1 and historic districts areas.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. But I do echo that on this site, for the historic district specifically, in the interest of staying in our lane, I think it's very appropriate, as opposed to cutting a large swath through an entire historic district.
Along those same lines, I guess I'm a little bit concerned that it seemed like some of the argument for this was that this immediate neighborhood, the block there, is already higher density than the surrounding area. So somehow that's a justification for yet increasing the density more, instead of, oh, well, then this has already got its share of increased density for the avenues. Let's do the increased density elsewhere. Like that we're just going to load up this one block. And it looks like, I mean, just that one townhouse development has done all it needs to for the block. But so I mean, it's sort of a concern that like that creeping zoning change where we just keep upping the density, and eventually the avenues are not the avenues anymore. So, but this may be the best zoning change regardless. But I do worry about the sort of the trend and where that may end up leading.
Make a motion regarding case number PLNP CM 2024-01079 in regards to approving to amend the zoning from SR1A to RMF 30 at the above stated address of 128 North N Street, that we move to approve, based on information garnered here tonight, I move we approve this application.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion from Babs and a second from Carlton. Running down the list. Babs?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Adrian?
Aye.
Carlton?
Aye.
Jared?
Aye.
Alan?
Aye.
And I am a yes as well, so it is unanimously passed. Thank you. And last but not least, let's talk about RMF 35 and RMF 45 multifamily zoning district merger. This is a briefing, not a public hearing. And the case number is PLN PCM 2024-01388. We have Aaron Barlow here and Grant Ammon. Talk twice as fast.
Oh, we're going to be here all night. Yeah, I think I wanted to mention before we started how this is applicable to the application you just looked at. You know, when a zoning district doesn't work, you start to see more and more applications to rezone and change it because it's not, either does not match what's on the ground or it creates other issues. And that's sort of the story here that we'll be telling about these zoning districts, RMF 35 and RMF 45.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Grant Ammon, and this is my colleague, Aaron Barlow. Today we have a proposal that is a briefing regarding a city-initiated proposal for the RMF 35 and RMF 45 zoning districts. The proposal is a continuation of the RMF 30 text amendment, which was adopted in 2022. RMF stands for residential multifamily. Our team has been working since spring 2024 doing due diligence and research on a proposal that would align and continue the success of RMF 30. This last application, as you see, RMF 30 is a desirable zone. And we've been studying the effectiveness of the currently existing RMF 35 and 45 districts. I wanted to include the current proposal here that we are proposing in order to provide context about why we are in front of you today. However, this is just a briefing. This text amendment will not alter historic preservation code or historic preservation requirements. It will impact properties whose underlying zoning is already RMF 35 or RMF 45, but no zoning map amendment is included in this. Listed here are the elements of the proposal, but we will review them in depth today. We are presenting this today to inform you what is coming next, but we also have a few questions for you that might help ensure the best possible proposal when it actually moves forward. So background, in order to provide necessary context, here is a map of the affected properties. Another reason we are presenting this briefing to you all is because roughly 30% of the properties zoned RMF 35 and RMF 45 are located within historic district boundaries. Not all of our historic districts are included in that. Yale Crest obviously doesn't have any RMF multifamily included. Westmoreland Place, Exchange Place as well don't have any included.
Sorry to interrupt, but why do you think that is, that there's so much of this zoning in this area?
I think we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that. It's the historic development pattern up there, and you start to see how and when things were built. There's, the history, the history of Yale Crest as a realtor and how it was built, why it was built, compared to other parts of the city closer to downtown.
But that is a good question, and let me know if I don't answer that moving forward. But again, the proposed text amendment will only impact the blue properties on this map. Next, where did these zones come from originally? What was their impetus? The two districts were established as a result of the 1995 rewrite. Their intended purpose was to encourage moderate density infill. So that's, in theory, what they currently allow, is that moderate density infill. They provide a variety of housing types, and they should keep development compatible with existing neighborhoods, especially these historic districts. And all of these are from the zone's purpose statements. That's where the authority for that. 1, 2. Again, we will get to that.
We're getting there.
But that is a good question as well, and that is a large part of what we are here for you today. So you got a good eye. And then maybe to at least partially answer your question, these zones were originally intended to be that middle space in between, the dense downtown and then our detached single-family home neighborhoods. It is now referred to as our missing middle. And there's a few missing middle types here listed. But what we have found now is that these zones are not providing the missing middle housing that was originally intended. Missing middle housing, is typically denser than single family, but smaller than large apartments. It's intended to help transition from neighborhoods to more urban areas. All right,
but we have, like Grant mentioned, we found that they aren't really doing what they were intended to do. As the zones are written, only a quarter of properties in these zones actually allow multifamily uses, or that's 3 or more units. The density limit on this district is limited at 5,000 square feet for a single unit, which is the density of a single family district. And that doesn't really, if this is a residential multifamily district, why is the density equal to that of a single family district? Additionally, 2/3 are not wide enough. Historically, lots were measured by rods, and 3 rods is 49.5 feet. The minimum lot width is 50 feet, essentially making a bunch of these properties just barely not wide enough for development, they're all legal non-conforming properties. And then, less than about half are smaller than the 5,000 square feet minimum lot size. That creates, again, the zoning regulations do not reflect what's on the ground currently. Next slide. Oh, and I wanted to mention, based on all of these issues, since 1996, only 4% of properties in these zones have seen any sort of building permit. 4%.
You never, ever see new construction of duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes out there at all.
It's left them to be locked in time. So this is just a map illustrating that 75% number. The properties in red are too small for 3 or more units, even though this is a multifamily district. Right, let's on to the next thing. So these are kind of the goals of this proposal, what we want to see happen. The first is to clarify the regulations. The first, we want to create a single form-based district and regulate based on building type, so that a specific, different types of buildings can have different impacts. So we want to have a building, if it's a multifamily building, there are going to be stricter regulations than a single-family house. If you remember, there's the mixed-use consolidation project that came through to revise some of the commercial and mixed-use districts. This proposal aligns with those requirements so that zoning requirements are easier to understand for the public, for developers, and for staff, so we don't spend hours in meetings debating the minutia of zoning regulations. And then, there is that we want to promote infill, preserve character in these regulations. That's the goal. Avoiding displacement as much as possible. That is a big ask. Displacement is a challenging subject to address. But part of that is this unit density bonus to incentivize retaining existing housing. then encouraging moderate density by modifying the lot requirements, and then prioritizing affordability by integrating existing affordable housing incentives into these regulations in a way that will incentivize developers to actually use them in these districts. Next slide.
All right. Next, we have formed a proposal based on our findings. First, the new zone will be form-based. Form-based regulations create specific regulations for different building forms like apartments, row houses, cottage courts, etc. Each building type has a different type of impact, and that impact needs to be mitigated. Each building form will have different regulations because different building forms have different impacts. And this will allow us to regulate those building forms individually. Row houses will have a different requirement from apartments or single-family dwellings, avoiding that one-size-all approach of the current zoning standards. Using a form-based code will also help promote consistency with the MU consolidation proposal that is currently moving through City Council as well. Next, these general standards will apply to all lots within the zone. First, there's a maximum 110-foot lot width. That's to help discourage lot banking, like we discussed a little bit. We are proposing increased flexibility for lot and building requirements for infill and to promote infill and home ownership. Lots may be subdivided without street frontage as part of a development, and multiple principal buildings will be located on a single lot. Those are both sort of carried over in line with RMF 30. And then mid-block walkways would be required according to the general plan. Now, coming back to our question about bonus units, our last item here is regarding bonus unit for building preservation. Obviously, historic standards and regulations are in place if an owner is looking to demolish or develop a property. We definitely want to encourage our naturally occurring affordable housing. We want to keep that. We want to help, obviously, preserve that as well as we can. And in order to do that, we have proposed this incentive to provide bonus units in return for keeping that naturally occurring affordable housing. We are currently proposing two per single family, or let me just go to the next slide, it's easier. 2 extra units for duplexes or 4 for multifamily. This is hopefully the answer to your question. We have a little illustration of what that means. And we do have a question to follow up your question. Do you think that unit bonuses, preservation incentives, or local historic preservation regulations are sufficient to deter displacement or demolition?
Okay, so if someone comes in they have a property and they want to do some kind of project, if they keep the existing single family or duplex, they're awarded 2 additional units beyond the minimum density requirements on the lot. If that is involving a multifamily row house or cottage court development with 3 or more units, then they're awarded 4 additional units of density beyond the minimum requirement. That could be within an existing house, it could be as a separate building, in whatever form fits the design proposal. So there's flexibility in how that's applied, but that's it's meant to encourage this as a by right incentive. You know, there are other incentives in place, but those do require restrictive covenants and things. This is essentially.
You're preserving. Just to be clear, you're preserving 1 or 2 existing units?
Yes.
Or 3 or more existing units?
Yes.
And if you do that, then you get 2 to 4 extra units per parcel, for the parcel, for the new parcel that's put together.
Or if it's a project area.
So in theory, instead of tearing down and rebuilding 4 units, you could get 8 by not tearing down those 3 units.
Preserve 3. So let's say you have a triplex, then you can get 4. So you're actually going to end up with 7 properties on one of these lots.
Yes.
Depending on lot
dense.
size.
That is dense.
Depending
yes.
on the, yeah.
So after after someone gets the incentive and builds them and sells them off, what's to maintain that preservation incentive for the next person?
So what we have proposed right now, you're getting into the details, which I like, is we issue a zoning certificate that would be recorded on the property in some sort of record, so that we're able to reference that if the demolition came through, we'd see that come up in the
So,
it would be a note, but that's up to change. If you think it needs a deed restriction, that's something we'd like to hear from you. Yep.
if there was an existing building on the property that's not existing as housing, but could be converted to housing, would those enter into the 2 to 4 extra housing?
No, it's only preservation of units, but there is, through the plan development process, which the Planning Commission would review, if you're changing a non-conforming commercial use to a residential use, there's a waiving of density requirements.
I guess I'm just curious if the whole aspect of what we're doing here is densifying housing, why wouldn't existing building that's converted to housing be considered as part of this densification?
I mean, that could be something we could add to the proposal as well, but that's already an option through the plan development process.
I'll just jump in. We're unlikely to have one of those warehouses or like large empty commercial structures in one of these zones. Most likely that would be a different zone that would already allow like a higher density use.
I guess the thing that came immediately to mind was a project that I think is going to thin brick, and there's an existing building there that's being torn down, and housing then is filling up that lot. So
Yeah.
my thinking is like, well, converting that to number of housing units would help them, and then the number of total housing units could potentially be increased. And you would leave the existing, that's where I was going with.
Wasn't that already worked into the
We have preservation.
the other overlay that has nothing to do, like the one that we already did last year?
So yeah, we have
adaptive reuse. There we go.
Yes.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, we have the building preservation incentives as well as the affordable housing incentives. They can be used together, but if you preserve a building, you're eligible for, it depends on which track, but potentially a different use or lot and bulk modifications. And so we have some of those built in place already.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that for a developer, making existing attractive, to them, so that there's a benefit that they would receive in terms of the number of housing units to be increased, I could see that could weigh favorably to what basically you're after is more units per per square foot.
This is what we're looking for commentary. Sorry about that. And just to loop that into the 3 or more units, that is an option. But it really, if someone, we'll talk about it, and I think we'll put it in our notes and add it there. And that's what this is for.
Yep.
Thank you.
And
Cool.
respect to your time, we'll keep going.
Well, this is such a point of semantics, but I did want to bring it up, and I wasn't sure where, but this is as good as any. The purpose of this proposal is not necessarily to densify. It's to get in line with the original zone purpose statement. And the reason why I bring up this point of minutia is that the previous item we had a short discussion regarding zoning creep, where you saw sort of this higher density zone moving out of where it's been for maybe the past 30 years. Well, here we have the past 30 years of these zones of a multifamily zone that has not been functioning. So in order to address sort of what you said earlier, the proposal's point here is technically kind of to address zoning creep by making the zone that should have multifamily accept that density that was always intentioned. So,
And we've seen quite a few rezones to RMF 30 from these 2 districts. One on 700 South, one in quite a few in the Poplar Grove neighborhood. There's been places where they've said right now the RMF 30 has a higher density allowance than the RMF 35 and 45 districts do.
Right. Earlier, we had a short discussion about lot width. This is an example in the avenues of one of these properties where this house is 49.5 feet wide. Because it's not 50 feet, it doesn't meet the minimum lot width requirement. This lot cannot be developed. Though the land area, the amount of square footage there, could accommodate up to 2 units, without the Historic Landmark Commission approval, they would not be able to develop at all. And again, this is only regarding 30% of the properties. 70% of the properties that are not within historic districts would have no way to be able to develop in conditions like this. All right.
So another thing that is missing from these districts are specific design standards. Right now, if something is built in the RMF 35, 45 outside of historic districts, because we do have that new construction process, they do not need to have a porch design. They can put as many or as little windows as necessary. The exterior materials can be EIFS or a cheap material. There's no limit on building widths or how they respect adjacent properties, especially historic buildings. So this proposal would introduce porch designs like the one illustrated here. It would require a certain amount of window coverage as well as window spacing, no blank walls wider than 15 feet. The exterior materials, or at least a portion of them, need to be high quality like brick, veneer, or kind of the things you see in a new construction project. And there's a limitation on building width to avoid buildings that overwhelm the pedestrian experience. And then there is this design standard that was introduced with the mixed-use consolidation to have step backs from historic landmark sites, not from districts, but from sites, basically a 45-degree angle up from the highest point of that building. And that is illustrated here, and that would be a part of this proposal as well.
Maybe that could be landmark sites. That makes sense, right? What about in a district structures?
Yeah, that is.
Is that covered? That
I don't know. I think that's something we've been kind of going back and forth on in our team, and seeing that if that's something you think needs to be included, we can bring that back to the team and say, like, the Landmark Commission thought this would be a useful piece. We were debating putting that for any single family district, if in that case, but for historic homes, there's they're going to be shorter. Especially in the avenues, they have that more reduced size. Your hand up.
Sorry to jump back. Did I hear correctly that you said that the RMF 30 is a higher density allowance than the RMF?
Yes, currently.
That happened.
So in 2022, the RMF 30 district was amended. Actually, Kelsey was a part of that team. But this, not to call her out or put her on the spot, but sorry. These districts were not included in that update, were mentioned as a future project as part of that project that was initiated essentially from the housing plan to encourage or to reduce barriers to new housing projects. And the issue here is the RMF 35 and 45, the minimum lot size is 5,000 square feet. So people have been rezoning from this district to RMF 30 because it has a more flexible density allowance, lot placement requirements, all these things that we're trying to fix right now in this proposal, and to avoid district creep. Okay, so this is just illustrating what I talked about. Oh, go ahead.
I just had a quick question about the design review. Mm-hmm. So we do design review.
Yes.
So who would be responsible for this design review for these zones? And would they have to go through design review, that design review, and if they're in the historic district, go through design review here as well?
So in a historic
design review,
new construction would still have to go in the historic districts would still go through you. In areas outside of historic districts, if they meet the base design standards, they would be able to be approved administratively, but modifications to those or alternative designs would need to go to the Planning Commission for design review or a plan development, depending on the specific standard. This is just illustrating the things I spoke about, like building fenestration, avoid missing windows, make sure there's sufficient glass, high quality building materials. This is actually the, I forgot the name of it, the clothing company, the on 11th East and 17th South.
The Salt Lake costume.
That's the one. Salt Lake costume, right.
Wow, how about that?
That's wild. Next slide.
Cool.
All right, so parking is been a hot button topic. We've been taking this proposal to all the community councils in the city. I've met with so many council chairs, gone to Tracy Aviary and other areas regularly. It's been mixed, generationally, actually. But the current standard is a little bit hard to follow. It's 1 to 2 spaces depending on the building type, whether it's detached, single family, a row house, an apartment building, and the number of units, whether it has 2 or 3. So a single family house is gonna have a higher parking standard than a 3-bedroom apartment, which is a little wild to me. But this proposal, because about 95% of buildings of properties in this district are within a quarter mile of transit, we're proposing to reduce that to 1 space per unit, no matter the type, no matter the number of dwelling units. And it's, in a way, is, again, promoting housing affordability. We're not saying you can't have 2 units, but we're not requiring it. And, sometimes developers, when they're trying to make things pencil out, they're choosing between a parking stall and a bedroom, and we'd rather they lean towards the bedroom in this case. To have that family-sized housing, 3 or more bedrooms in a unit.
Just a comment.
Yes.
Turn your mic on.
1 to 2 spaces per unit. Do you accept something that's more in line with like 0.85 parking spaces per bedroom? I just designing a number of residential units, the 1 space per unit couple.
So this is a simplified explanation of how our parking requirements work. Right now, parking is split into 4 contexts. You have a general context, or like a single family neighborhood with the most strict parking requirements. You have a neighborhood center context, an urban context, and then a transit context. In the transit areas, there are no parking requirements for the most part. Urban, they're very limited, they're very small. In the neighborhood context, it's 1 space per dwelling unit. And that's really where this district sits, in between the more intense neighborhoods and the single family.
I'm going to respectfully disagree. Areas that you outlined, like five units or 5 slides prior, you're just forcing more and more parking on the street. That's ultimately what's going to wind up happening.
If we want to maintain kind of the granular nature of these neighborhoods, requiring parking is going to make those be more spread out, and you'll lose that quaint character that you have in the avenues or in Central City. And that's essentially what we want to see, is a continuation of the character there. When there weren't parking requirements at that time, or we're still requiring 1 parking space per unit, and we're not limiting the number of spaces per dwelling unit.
Okay. Now you're proposing it as a standard, but it's not. Developers, may be able to do 2 spaces per unit, or two spaces for 2 bedrooms, because it will sell more easily than if it's underparked.
Yeah, but that just, we have 2. That's correct. Well, we will.
I'm just expressing it that it's been my experience that developers will do that because they do sell easier. And that if indeed you have mass transit that really is easy, within 150 feet or so from the front door, yes. If it's further than that, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks, you're just going to have more and more parking on the street.
So we don't see that, but we're not limiting it to 2 spaces. We're providing that flexibility in contexts where it will work.
Fair enough.
I love that you said it was generational, because anyone under 25 right now that I would be working with does not drive, does not ever want to drive. They're all bicycle people or scooter people. So I think, the older, the more people acquire, so they have 2 cars, and then they got an RV or an ATV or what have you. It really, generational, just that really hit it for me. I'm gonna have to use that.
And these neighborhoods are urban. They're walking distance from downtown. You're in the city.
And we're going to get more tracks as well in the next 10 years, connecting east and west, which is going to help a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hope so.
So with these,
Yeah.
with these building forms, each building form has a specific requirement depending on the type. You know, they're going to have different height requirements, different lot coverage requirements. Minimum lot size is going to vary based on building type. And then, you know, the number of units per building they're going to change based on how they impact their neighbors, as well as the garage location. For row houses, they can't face the street. For cottage courts, they can't be attached to the buildings. And then setbacks will be different because, you know, a 45-foot high multifamily building is going to have more impact than a 23-foot high cottage development.
Awesome. And yeah, we do have a list here of all of the building forms that we are proposing. And we wanted to go through those one by one. There is a list, as you can see on the screen, of a short list of those requirements. We can go into depth on those if it's desired. But our lowest density here is the urban house and 2-family. An urban house is up to 2 units, 1 or 2. And then 2-family, of course, has 2 units. These are 2 units in a single, 2-family have both front doors facing the street. Urban house may have a second unit whose entrance does not face the front. Single-family scale buildings or twin homes must meet these requirements, including that minimum lot area of 1,500 square feet, yes. Next, we have our cottage court, cottage development. This is 3 to 8 small buildings in a single development. They will have a common area, some green space. There will be a larger lot area per lot will be required to encourage more green space and to account for limited height. Next is our row house or townhome. It might be a little bit different picture depending on if it's in the historic district, of course. But these are attached units built in a row, 3 to 6 per form. They might be sideways or horizontal to the street. And then we would require an emphasis on entries and street design. And then finally, our multifamily. Yep. But it's beautiful. These will have up to 20 units per buildings with a height limit to encourage smaller scale buildings. The 20 unit limit may change after discussions with architects and developers. And then I did want to list this as well. Additional height for our multifamily would be permitted through incentives. In order to encourage desired development and discourage demolition, additional height will be available for multifamily buildings incorporating either affordable housing or building preservation incentives, and that's one or the other.
No, affordable housing and the building adaptive reuse incentives, you have to choose one or the other. That's how it's written in the code currently.
Yeah, it's more of that. Exactly, you got it.
They're essentially the same incentive for either one.
The tower behind the building.
You got it.
So the goal here, by limiting height to 45 feet, you're still going to have buildings that might not be everyone's favorite, but they will not. To have a 5/1, you typically need 55 feet of height or 5 stories. You know, the kind of buildings you see on North Temple or 400 South. If a developer wants to do that, be lazy, they can do it, but they have to have an affordable element to that to make it approvable in that district. Next slide.
I'm sorry for asking so many questions.
Yeah.
Building incentives, or building preservation, rather. Can you give me an example of
yes.
that?
That's the adaptive reuse incentives. That included building preservation incentives for buildings that are over 50 years old. You can enter into agreement with the city where there's a restrictive covenant on there to maintain that historic building. And there are certain things waived, including density requirements and building height requirements.
So that's getting
This has to be
to
50 years old. It does not have to be contributing or landmark status, correct?
No, it's just age. Yeah, it's just age in general. And the reason we have that other incentive, the unit bonus, is that there are buildings, built in the 90s or 80s that may not be 50 years old, or, they don't want to go through the process of a zoning incentive. This is just another option. There's multiple avenues for a property owner or a developer to find ways to maintain the existing building and add more housing units to our neighborhoods.
Outside of historic preservation, there's value in preserving a unit built in the year 2000, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
And historic is at the 50-year mark?
Yeah, the ordinance is 50 years, and yet historic generally is 50 years unless it has some significance. And I believe there is a carve out for a building that has some sort of architectural or historic significance that's newer.
Yeah, it's not really a hard set rule, but it's kind of the rule of thumb.
Yeah, this has 2 front doors. These are some examples. This kind of explains why we're proposing what we're proposing as far as density requirements. These are existing buildings in these districts. This is in the avenues, and currently there are 4 units on 3,400 square feet. Currently, the district only allows 1 unit. Under this proposal, it would allow 4 units again. One thing I want to mention is we do have a unit legalization process for existing buildings that have multiple units in them, and they have to provide proof to establish the time in which that those units were created in that house, but they also only have to follow fire and building codes from that time. Under this requirement, someone could still do that. They could do 4 units in a house. Let's say this didn't have 4 units in it, but it would have to meet current building and fire requirements with, wall thickness, sprinklers, whatever is necessary to meet the fire marshal's requirements. So our hope is there's a public safety element to this as well, because since fire is kind of on our minds at the moment.
Isn't there kind of a 2-unit allowance right now because of the ADU ordinance? You could do it
ADU would also require current building codes.
Oh, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. With codes, okay. Attention. Willfully. Yeah.
This is a great apartment building in the East Central neighborhood, and it's a little more intense than what is typically found in the district. These are 7 units on a 4,000 square foot lot. Currently, it would only allow 1 unit. Our proposal would bring it up to 5. It's not quite 7, but it is bringing this district to closer to what is already on the ground. So just to recap, we're wanting to clarify these regulations because currently they're really hard to follow, especially the density requirements. As you get more land, the larger the piece of property, the higher the density you're allowed to have. So that really encourages land banking for developers to, scoop up property, and then once it pencils out, to clear that area and then put down a new development. I think Foothill Place is a good example of that. This is also, so we want to promote infill and preserve character and avoid things like that. Avoid displacement as much as possible. Want that moderate density that already exists on the ground but may be missing in other places, and then prioritizing affordability by wrapping up those incentives, the height incentives, into this proposed district.
So question, and it may have been in here and I just didn't see it, or I glazed over it. And with the merger, what happens to existing RMF 35 zones?
So everything would go into the proposed RMF 45 district. It becomes sort of a hybrid of the two, where there are building forms up to 35, up to 45. Both heights are allowed in the district. It just depends on the building type. And with the more intense building type, there are more intense requirements, bigger setbacks. Will require landscape yards, which means landscaping and fences between multifamily buildings and single-family districts like the SR1A. Currently, that's not a requirement. It's really just to create a something that's more usable and more flexible for property owners. And
So, but for an area that's currently zoned RMF 35, with the additional incentive, then in theory, you could go up to 55 feet in somewhere that's currently limited to 35.
yes, if they can make that work, if there is an affordable element to that, if there's a lot that has to happen, but that is the case, and that's where we have, we have those elements of setbacks and other things to keep that impact limited, but also recognizing that we're going to continue to see people want to move into Salt Lake City, and the way that the housing prices are going, the steam cap has to be pulled off somewhere, and we're hoping to do that, through the entire city, and this is just one piece of it as well.
Right. As well. No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. I was thinking we briefly brought up, okay, how landmark sites are treated versus contributing sites in a district, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would think that we should treat contributing sites near the same as landmark sites, right? I think that kind of gets back to some of a conversation about zoning creep or whatever we called that. But I think those sometimes in a district, there's not much of an incentive to make it a landmark site just because you already get all the benefits if it's contributing in some regards. So there's no reason it couldn't be, very similar to a landmark site. That's just my small thought on that too. So
yeah, we can bring it up with their superiors.
Right.
So it's just a follow-up to your suggestion. So at the 55-foot mark, you would, for any multifamily building that achieves that additional height, you would want to see the 45-degree plane when they're abutting a contributing structure, or the 45-degree plane applied to all building forms?
You're saying contributing structure.
Well, I guess
I'm just wondering if there's a threshold that you're looking for, or if you're thinking the 45-degree step back has to be applied to every building form that's potential.
So
does that make sense?
The objective with the landmark sites is to protect them from being overshadowed, right? That's kind of the objective, if I'm understanding it. Mm-hmm. I think we should have that same objective with contributing structures. I don't know if that really answers your question.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents on it. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts or if that even makes sense, but.
Well, I think that having a formal statement of that setback and the slope would have informed the conversations that we had about the big multifamily projects on 7th South that surrounded the one building that was left there. Mm-hmm. Particularly where some of the original proposals were, they had a 6-story cement wall across the short drive lane.
I worked on that.
That's not RMF 45 anyway. So,
no, true.
That's the transit TOD, whatever zone.
It's TSA.
TSA.
Yeah. But along those lines, that kind of situation.
Yeah.
Same idea.
That's an extreme example.
Yep.
This is the last slide. This is where we're at right now. We're meeting with community councils, holding open houses. The next one is with East Central Community Councils having a renters fair at the McGillis School on February 13th, starting at 6:30. We'll be there the whole time. Renters fair? Yeah, Renters Resource Fair. I don't really know all the details. Their website has those details, but we will be also in the gym. East Central Community Council.
Which councils have you already presented to? Do you know offhand?
Yes, we have Capitol Hill, Liberty Wells, East Liberty, Poplar Grove, Sugar House, Central City.
Liberty, just regular Liberty.
Oh, yeah.
I think
among
that's
others.
it.
I think that's it. Yeah.
I'm impressed.
And
there's been a couple others that are not specific.
We have avenues scheduled for March 5th, I believe, and you're telling me, and
We don't have to go, right?
no, and again, East Central next week. I met with their executive committee, but this will be for the general public.
Just a comment that, thank you, for what you've done. This is it sounds like it's pretty easy, going from 30 to 45 or whatever the numbers are. It's not. And just, I photographed what you have of the duplex side-by-side, fourplex, courtyard, a cottage court, townhouse, multifamily. There are so many different types of housing that we have, marching from single family to multi-story kind of things. And I agree with a lot of stuff. I question a lot of stuff. It's an obvious response to being upside down, anywhere from 25 to 40,000 units that's needed, and I get it. It's just, this is what you're doing here is accommodating the change that's necessary to house the people that are wanting very desperately to move to Salt Lake and be downtown as opposed to out in the burbs. So it's a daunting challenge, and I think there's going to be multiple iterations of everything that you're proposing here for all of those little subset issues like we talked about that are going to come in. So, but thank you for this work.
Of course.
Say it again.
No, this is just a briefing right now.
Yeah. And
well, it'll come back before us for a formal. Yeah, not tonight.
Yeah, if you want to see it again, we can. But it will be going to the Planning Commission on March 12th for a public hearing. We're going to a briefing for them next week on February 12th. The dates are the same in those 2 months. It always throws me off. Next slide has our contact info, but you have that in their staff report. Please send me your comments or thoughts as well. They may not have had a chance to articulate or
go over everything.
We're happy to hear them.
Certainly. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, and we are adjourned.